Okay, aloha kākou. So I'm really happy to be here today. I was able to talk earlier to a whole bunch of students about some of the scholarship and research and the larger project of recovering our sense of ourself and our history through work at the university. Although Kalekoa said I'm gonna educate, really this is stuff that I am learning also, like very much in real time, and I'm happy to share it because it's some stuff that I just think provides us some new perspectives and new ways of looking at our history. And before I get into it, I wanna begin by talking about the Ku'e petitions and then eventually end with it, because that's we're leading into the story of the resistance to annexation. So the Ku'e petitions, we talked about earlier the research that Noenoe Silva was doing on Hawaiian history and resistance to the overthrow, and how she and some others sort of found the Ku'e petitions in the Library of Congress in the mid-90s. And this was something that you could find evidence of here and there a little bit in Hawaiian historical scholarship, but nobody knew the magnitude. Nobody could have predicted sort of to what degree and at what levels that our kupuna organized and laid their refusal down to be annexed to the United States. And that, from what I understand, because I come into Hawaiian knowledge and I come into Hawaiian history after that's already happened. But from talking to my dad and from talking to other older folks, that wasn't a thing that was really known before then, right? The narrative, folks in this tent probably have a lot more to say about this than I ever can, but the narrative of the overthrow and about coming, to become a part of the United States was something more along the lines of inevitability. This is what Lili'u decided to kind of hand over the kingdom to the United States, that this is where progress comes in, and narratives like these, right? And so learning that in 1897, Hawaiians took leadership and created an incredible ground game with no social media, mind you, not even cars, and organized the citizenry to sign these petitions, refusing and saying we do not want to be annexed to the United States, using the newspapers to let people know what was coming into their town, that representatives would be coming with these petitions, and this is what this petition was about, and when you get this petition, please sign your name on this petition. So basically just using newspapers, churches, sites where communities already got together and getting out there and collecting these signatures. And then we learned that each hui aloha aina and hui kalai aina, each collect over 20,000 signatures. And I don't know if anyone has done an analysis yet of overlap of signatures, but mind you, this is at a time when there's only a little over 40,000 Hawaiians, period, right, in the kingdom. So if we add those signatures together, we're looking at almost universal opposition, right? If we assume some kind of degree of overlap, we're still looking at majority opposition. And that changes our whole understanding of ourselves and our whole understanding of our history and our whole understanding of our current relationship to the United States, right? Who is the occupier. And this has come to inform Hawaiian sovereignty politics. It's come to inform a lot of people's engagement and activity. I talked about earlier when the Department of Interior came in the summer of 2014 and asked the question, Hawaiians, how do you feel about the question of federal recognition, becoming a federally recognized tribe of the United States? Nobody had any idea that these 15 meetings, that the masses would just show up. Nobody had any idea. It was kind of, even myself, I thought, it's going to be kind of the same old people, me being one of them, that's going to show up and be like, no. But just like these things were packed, packed with just people. And so many of those people stood upon their kupuna's signature on the ku'e petitions to make their position that we have claims to this place that are much broader than anything that could ever be offered to us through federal recognition as a tribe in the United States. So that's just to talk about the importance of recovering our history and how our memory can change, our very relationship and position to the country we think we're in and to the country that we're really in can change by recovering that which was taken away from us when our language was banned, when we were shamed out of our history, and all of those things. So this presentation comes out of the preparation work that I had to do to go on the Hawaiian Youth Abroad trip this past summer that Nalani talked about earlier, where a bunch of us were privileged through the hard work of Nalani Beluski, who hustled the funds and had this vision to go trace the diplomatic steps of the Ali'i in England and France. And I needed to know before going over there, what were they being exposed to when they were going over there, right? Like, what were the big political questions in Europe that the Ali'i were likely informed of, were likely being told about by foreigners who were coming here, were likely witnessing and being, the dialogue around when they would make these trips to Europe, like what was going on. And when I started to do that research to give me some context to go over to England and to visit France, like this other shift in my whole understanding of our history happened. And so I'm going to share a little bit about that. Okay, this is the ugliest PowerPoint you've probably seen in a long time. Sorry, it's complex. I'll get it nice at some point. But this is just a visual representation of kind of how I went about it. So a lot of us can probably name the mo'i in succession from Kamehameha all the way to Liliuokalani. But do we know who their contemporaries were? Yeah. Do we know who was ruling in these other countries at times? So this is sort of a visual representation of the first column being the Hawaiian Kingdom, the second one being England, and the third one being France. And like Queen Victoria takes up so much of that space because she actually ruled England from Kauikeoli's reign through past the overthrow even. So it's sort of supposed to line up like that. But if we start to look at these countries and we start to look at ourselves in relationship to what the big questions were at the time, we come to see some things that I don't think the current narratives of Hawaiian history are telling us. And I actually want to offer this too as an approach to creating social studies curriculum in Hawaiian schools, even in Kaiapuni, because this is a way that we can actually touch on European history, but that centers the Hawaiian Kingdom and what we were thinking about and having to navigate at the time. So on the left side here, this is sort of an older narrative that even some contemporary Hawaiian history done by Hawaiian scholars, are trying to work through. But a lot of the history done by non-Hawaiians and even some Hawaiians have told us this narrative on the left that when we became a kingdom, when we were adopting constitutionalism, that we were sort of catching up with the West, right? Like these are Western ideas that came in and we had to figure them out and hurry up and get them in place so we weren't like totally invaded and taken over as a colony. That we were doing what foreigners told us to do, right? So we didn't know these things. We didn't know these Western ways. So we had to take the counsel and the advice of foreigners and kind of trust their superior understanding of worldly ways. That the political changes in the 19th century were were basically equated to massive disruptive changes in Hawaiian governing orders and ways. And there were major changes, certainly. But as Kamana Beamer's scholarship has showed us, we also brought older institutions of governance into the 19th century and then negotiated how to reform those with some of the Western modes of governance. And then this kind of results in a narrative that tells us that our ali'i further distance themselves from the interests and well-being of maka'ainana for self or foreign interests, right? So these are some of the narratives that come out of historical scholarship. But when we look at what was going on in Europe at the time, and even the United States, and even Japan, and even China, and countries around the world, we see that we actually were dealing with these questions along with these other countries. These other countries were having almost a hell of a lot harder time than we were trying to figure out questions about constitutionalism, about what kind of monarchy to have, about the relationship that the monarchy is going to have with the people. And we come out looking much more stable, actually, and progressive in many ways than some of these countries. So when we look at it this way, it shows that our ali'i were asking and toiling with questions of governance and international order along with countries around the world, not by just being fed by countries from around the world. That they were engaging with new ideas and receiving foreign counsel, but deliberating in native counsel and making negotiated decisions with Hawaiian national interests at the core, and bringing forward at the same time traditional institutions of governance. That it shows us the stability of our institutions that were brought forward from pre-contact or pre-internationalizing into the 19th century. And we see like there's mass instability in some of the other countries, which I'll look at, which tells us, it gives us a better understanding of our relationship between ali'i and maka'ainana. So that's just sort of to set it up. So let's get into some examples. So what were the big questions at the time? Well, monarchies still ruled much of Europe. And so they were trying to figure out, can we hold on to absolutist monarchies, right? Where there's just one ruler ordained by God and what I say goes. Do we have to adopt some degree of constitutionalism or create these broader set of laws that define the relationship and responsibilities between the sort of elites and the rest of the people? Or do we want to abolish monarchies altogether? Because that was a big drive for a lot of the people in Europe. The question of civil liberties, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion and toleration. This was not something that was like just newly came to our shores and we had to grapple with. Like all of Europe was going crazy and having revolutions after revolutions over these same ideas, while we were sort of peacefully implementing them. And then the enfranchisement, or the ability to vote and participate in government of the business and working class, usually through some representative system of government. So again, this wasn't something that, Europe had figured out and then, Europe and the United States and then brought to the shores of the Hawaiian Kingdom. They were totally toiling over this, just as much, if not more, than we were. So here is just a picture of Kamehameha and his contemporaries. So his contemporary in England was George III, of course, who led the counter-revolution in the American Revolution, and Louis XVI. And Louis XVI was basically the last king of a long period of absolute monarchies. So he reconvenes because he's totally hurting for money because of the money that they've put into the war with the United States and England. And he reconvenes the assembly, and basically the business class, the class of everybody else who's not in the noble class or who's in the church, is like, we're done with this and we want rights. And they voted and they established a national assembly, and thus began the French Revolution at this time. So the French Revolution is happening during Kamehameha's lifetime. Put this up here. As Kamehameha is continuing to bring the islands together, as he's conquering the islands and unifying the islands, France is going crazy, like for real. They're having a bad time. They overthrow the monarchy. They create this national assembly, this democracy. And Louis XV ends up at the guillotine, right? As does, what's her name? Let them eat cake. Marie Antoinette, thank you. They end up at the guillotine, right? So you look at that example just in and of itself, and there's a particular thing that's been going on between the French people and the French elites, right, the governing bodies, for a long time that has led to this degree of unrest, that there's a people-led revolution that cuts off the head of the king and queen, okay? So we're like, but you know, Kamehameha is also doing his kind of crazy thing. He's conquering these islands. There's violence. There's all this stuff. So this stuff is happening simultaneously. And I haven't found the evidence, but I'm positive that news of this kind of thing is coming to Kamehameha from different foreigners who are privy to it and who are coming over here. So he's thinking about these things already on a strategic level. Of course, then in France, what precedes that initial French Revolution is what's known as the Reign of Terror, where some of the revolutionaries get incredibly zealous, and it turns into this witch hunt of anybody who's sympathetic to monarchical rule or anything but sovereignty within the people. Popular sovereignty ends up on the guillotine. And within 1 year's time, there's almost 17,000 death sentences in France, okay? So that's what's going on over there in France. Okay, just bring all this up because I don't want to spend too much time on all, oops, okay. So the French Revolution happens. Napoleon Bonaparte kind of rises to power as a military commander, and he's wreaking havoc all over Europe. Kamehameha very smartly makes an agreement with Britain to become a British protectorate, right? And that's a strategic move. It's not a move of submission. It's a strategic move for stability and security. And then in 1815, so Kamehameha is still alive. He's the mo'i. He's basically unified all of the islands. All of Europe is a mess, and they convene the Congress of Vienna with these countries that are listed here. And the main function of the Congress of Vienna is to restore order and to sort of create a set of agreements among these countries, among the aristocrats and the monarchies, to prevent revolution and to prevent republicanism. And republicanism is the idea of that sovereignty lies with the people, not with the monarch, okay? So they're trying to figure out, right? The people are like, no, it's not just the monarch. And the monarchs are like, maybe we can give a little, but we do not want to let go of this power. So they make agreements, they create strong, countries surrounding France to keep France in check, because France is like it is today, right? It might spark the next world revolution. France is a problem. So they do that. And I'm gonna come back to that. Actually, no, I'm gonna get to it right here. Okay. So this skips ahead a little bit, but this is something that I actually found in the British National Archives. We probably have copies of it here in the State Archives as well. But in 1844, the Hawaiian Kingdom, this is under Kauikeauli, basically puts forward the Hawaiian Kingdom's agreements to enter into this sort of international order as well. And if you can see on the right, it's in Hawaiian. So again, this is a great social studies text, yeah, for kaiapuni or for immersion. It cites right there. It cites the Aha Olelo o Vienna, Makahiki 1814, the Congress of Vienna, yeah. And it cites the Congress of Vienna as like, this is how we're situating this agreement. And then it goes on to list who, like what the titles are of diplomats and representatives of the Hawaiian Kingdom, who has the rights to represent the Hawaiian Kingdom, you know, how other diplomats come into the Hawaiian Kingdom. So it's also saying like, yep, we're down for some international order. Like here's how we're coming into this. And they send this out to all of these countries so that all of these countries know this is part of the international engagement. And that's why there's a copy in the, you know, Foreign Affairs section of the British National Archives, because they received these copies. And then, like, a look at Kamehameha II. His contemporaries are George III, who passes away, and then is George IV. And then, you know, the monarchies kind of reestablish some kind of control. So we see another king up here, Louis XVIII in France. And looking at what Liholiho and Ka'ahumanu were doing in the kingdom at this time, and think about it also in this international context. So they had the daunting task of stabilizing unification, right? We spend a lot of time on Kamehameha's unifying, conquering the islands, but what are you left with when the conqueror passes away and you have all of these islands that were violently, you know, subjected to central rule? You're gonna have a huge possibility for uprisings. So that's sort of the task of Liholiho and Ka'ahumanu. The fall of the Aikapu happens right there, and I'm really interested to think about the fall of the Aikapu in the context of kind of reordering the political, social stratas in Hawaii. The Battle of Kuamo'o happens. Okay, Kauai, so I think this might have been what Kalekoa was referring to. You know, Kauai is seen as one of these places that might kind of revolt against unification. Kaumu Aliʻi is the Ali'i Nui of Kauai, and they get word of it. They go over there. Liholiho basically snatches him, takes him on board, and Ka'ahumanu takes him as a husband. And that's it. And now he's in the court of Ka'ahumanu. You know, he's in the court of Liholiho, and they have squashed a potential rebellion, right? And so this gets a little bit into my own specific research, looking at how, in this instance, Ka'ahumanu uses her power, but also marriage as the sort of stabilizing political force of that time with Kaumu Aliʻi. She also takes his son, by the way. So she takes Kaumu Aliʻi, you're my husband now, and she takes his son, you're my husband now too. You know, let's just like make sure, right? And I think she has to let go of some of her husbands when she converts to Christianity, but I know, damn Christianity. Ugh. Right, she kept Kaumu Aliʻi, but he was like, get me out of here, I'm going to Maui. Okay, but this is a big deal, right? Like, you cannot have all this unrest at a time when there's just, your shores are being bombarded with representatives from countries that are full of unrest, right? And have their own agendas and things like that. So I, you know, this is an amazing time in our history. And then, of course, Liholiho Kamehameha Elua goes on the first, you know, diplomatic journey abroad. His mission is to get to England to sort of reinforce the agreements between England and Kamehameha and be like, yo, you still got our back, right? You know, and to negotiate that. And he stops in what is at that time the Empire of Brazil, and he meets with the Emperor of Brazil. That's where he gives the Emperor one of his beautiful ahu'ula, his cloaks that was recently burned up in the fire at the Brazil National Museum. So he goes and he goes at that time. So I don't get into it here, but I want to look at, and I want anybody to look at, like, what's going on in England at the time. Like, what is what is Liholiho prepared for? What might he be exposed to there? Like, what are the big political debates going on? And how might that inform his positions on things, although he passes away in England? Looking at Ka'ahumanu, this is an excerpt from Kamakau's Mo'olelo of Ka'ahumanu, and it talks about the Tahitians that come here, 10 minutes, okay, with Ellis. And it cites, in particular in the quotations, Kaumi, who Kahala Johnson is doing a lot of research on, but it says, "O Kaumi ke kumunui a Ka'ahumanu, a nana ya oaku ina ohua o nā li'i." And what I love about this is that it shows that it was actually not necessarily these New England missionaries that were coming and sharing these ideas around Christianity and Protestantism, right? They were here and they were trying to do that, but it was when the Tahitians got here that they sort of went into Ka'ahumanu's court, and they went into the court of the Ali'i, and that's where I'm imagining the real heavy exchanges started to take place, and probably had an impact on Ka'ahumanu's eventual decision to convert to Christianity. She sends Kanaka to Kula to learn pi'apa, right? She is the first one to democratize education in Hawaii. These are like the steps towards liberalizing sort of governance, democratizing education, bringing, getting on a mission to lift up the masses, not just tax them. She was staunchly anti-overtaxing. She would nail ali'i who she found out were like overtaxing or overworking or overburdening particular maka'ainana. So there's political thought in here is basically what I'm trying to get at, right? It's not just making a decision by the fly of your pants every day, right? She's engaging in new ideas. All of these ali'i are. So Ka'ahumanu is engaging in these new ideas that are brought to her. She's looking at the political landscape. God knows she's been trained her whole life in politics and strategy and war. And perhaps she's making a decision that lifting up the people at this time through education is something that we got to do, right? That ain't happening in Europe, and that ain't happening in the United States either. And this is early kingdom period, right? This is 1824. And so the fall of the Aikapu obviously blows apart the way that society was ordered, but she continues to do this, right? She continues to make a point to hang out with maka'ainana so long as they're into talking about the stuff she's into talking about, which is Christianity. These are some other things to look at. So the question of suffrage, of universal manhood suffrage, is one of the things that there's big uprisings in England around 1832, 1838, and a little bit further, the Charter Movement. The Charter Movement was this movement of workers in England who were disenfranchised from political participation, and they were showing up in the hundreds of thousands at these big, assemblies to make their demands for reform. So it wasn't really revolution, but it was a powerful mobilization towards reform to give them more participation. Alexander Liholiho and Lot Kapuaiwa are visiting England when this is the big political question in England at the time. Interestingly, and I don't know how to interpret this yet, I need to do much more research. In the 1852 Constitution that Kauikeuli puts forward, he gives universal manhood suffrage in the 1852 Constitution, and Alexander Liholiho and Lot Kapuaiwa basically spend their time reversing that. There's something about it that they don't like. They're not into just universal participation, and I'm not sure what that's about, but I do take note that they're in England at the time when that is the big question and there's mass mobilization around it. I'm not going to go through that. Okay. This is just to point out that in 1848, there were revolutions in dozens of countries in Europe. I mean, real revolutions. And that wasn't happening here, which to me says something about the relationship between the maka'ainana and the ali'i, because these were people-driven revolutions. This is just sort of a lateral, visual representation of Kamehameha Ekolu's contemporaries. There's our boy, Louis Philippe. That's the one that was reigning when France signed the Anglo-French Proclamation. He has the biggest painting in Iolani Palace. I used to hate that painting. I was like, who is this white man that has a bigger painting than Kalakaua and Lili'uokalani? Kalani? And then I did my research. I was like, oh, okay, he's cool. He's good. Yeah, but the French think otherwise eventually. They overthrow him too. He's too kingy. He calls himself King of the French, not King of France, King of the French, which is to signal I'm King of the French people, right? King of France was sort of the monarchy way of talking about things. King of the French was the I'm with you people way of talking about things. But the French are crazy and they're like, yeah, you're too kingy for us, and they overthrew him as well. Okay, so I'm gonna stop there, but to bring this to this wonderful play, this is the work that the Lahui is just engaging in. This is, Hawaiian studies at Maui College, Hawaiian studies at Manoa, at all of these different campuses. There's full-on community-driven research. You go into the archives any day of the week in Honolulu, and you have kupuna in there, you have opio in there, you have people just doing their research because we're driven to, because we know what happens when we do that. We recover this whole sense of ourselves. That Gugi Watiango talks about the cultural bomb. That is the function of stripping a people from their language, is to drop the cultural bomb and make us believe that our history is just a vast wasteland, right? And we saw that quote earlier from Sam Damon, one of the early trustees of Kamehameha schools, that says, if we are to have peace and annexation, we must first obliterate the past. So, didn't quite work. Yeah, so, and that's the good story of today, right? Today's a day of Kaumaha. It's an Eha day that we carry in our hearts. But the good news is we're all still here. We're learning our language. We're recovering our language. We're reforming the Department of Education that we now know we started. That didn't come. That wasn't an American. That's not an American institution. And art is a big part of that as well. So these plays, the work that Lynette Cruz has done to set up the names, the placards of those who signed up the Ku'e petitions at different sites has been a huge part of raising our consciousness about our real history. And the more that we do this work and the more that we engage this work, the more we understand why our kupuna were so determined to hold on to that national identity, right? To hold on to that national autonomy that we had, to hold on to that ability to govern ourselves according to the traditions of our ancient institutions and the ways that we had been reforming them throughout the 19th century. And so I'll just close there and mahalo for now bringing us back to that point of resistance with the Queen's play. Mahalo.